Julian was everything the society pages claimed he was, a visionary architect with the hands of a sculptor and a heart that seemed to beat only for his new bride, Claire. Their wedding had been a midsummer dream on the cliffs of Amalfi, and now, they had returned to his ancestral estate in the Blackwood Valley, a sprawling masterpiece of glass, steel, and ancient stone. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vance," Julian whispered, his voice a rich, velvet baritone. He swept Claire into his arms at the threshold, carrying her over the oak-heavy door as if she were made of spun glass. The first month was a blur of domestic bliss. Julian was the perfect husband, attentive, deeply romantic, and possessively devoted. He would leave handwritten sonnets on her vanity and surprise her with candlelit dinners in the conservatory. When he looked at her, his dark eyes held a searing intensity that made Claire feel like the only woman in existence. But every masterpiece has its shadows. Julian's estate was a labyrinth. While he spent his days in the West Wing city office, Claire explored the halls. She loved the way the sunlight hit the marble, but she noticed a consistent pattern. Julian always kept the key to the basement level on his person, even when he showered. One rainy Tuesday, Julian left in a rush, his mind preoccupied with a new skyscraper project. As Claire walked past his mahogany dressing table, she saw it, the heavy, silver skeleton key glinting in the dim light. Driven by a mix of playful curiosity and a strange, fluttering anxiety, she took the key. She made her way to the heavy, reinforced steel door hidden behind a velvet tapestry in the library. The lock turned with a smooth, expensive click. Claire expected a wine cellar or perhaps a vault for his architectural blueprints. Instead, she stepped into a room bathed in soft, recessed amber light. The air smelled of expensive oil paint and her favorite perfume. Her breath hitched. The room was a shrine. Every inch of the walls was covered in hyperrealistic portraits of her. But these weren't photos from their wedding. They were sketches of her sleeping, painting in the garden, even a drawing of her from 3 years ago, long before they had ever met. In the center of the room stood a marble pedestal with a glass case. Inside was a single, preserved rose, the exact one she had dropped at a gala years ago, a night she thought he hadn't even noticed her. "Do you like your gallery, Claire?" The voice came from the doorway. Julian stood there, his silhouette blocking the light. He wasn't angry, he was smiling, a slow, beautiful, and terrifyingly devoted smile. He walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet, and tucked a stray hair behind her ear with a hand that trembled slightly. "I've been building this room since the moment I first saw you," he breathed, his eyes locking onto hers with a hunger that crossed the line from romance into obsession. "Everything I am, every stone of this house, was designed to keep you safe, to keep you mine." The heavy steel door didn't slam, it closed with a soft, expensive click that sounded like a final heartbeat. Julian moved toward her, the amber light catching the sharp lines of his tailored suit. He didn't look like a villain, he looked like the man who had spent every morning for the last month bringing her coffee and soft kisses. That was the most terrifying part. "Julian," Claire whispered, her back pressing against the cold marble pedestal. "You've been watching me for 3 years." He stopped just inches from her, his presence enveloping her like a shroud. He reached out, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip with a tenderness that made her shiver. "Not watching, Claire. Protecting. Studying. I didn't just want a wife, I wanted a muse. I built this estate as a frame for your beauty." He turned toward the wall of portraits, hundreds of sketches of her in moments she thought were private. Her reading by a fountain in Paris. Her sleeping on a train. Her crying at her father's funeral. "How did you get these?" she gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Love finds a way to be present," he murmured, his voice a low, hypnotic velvet. He stepped closer, his large frame caging her against the pedestal. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "Most men are content with a photograph. I wanted the soul. Every line I drew brought me closer to the day I could finally claim you." The romance was still there, The way he looked at her was pure, unadulterated adoration, but it was wrapped in a possessive intensity that made the room feel small. He picked up the preserved rose from the glass case. "You dropped this at the Winter Gala in 2023, he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You were wearing emerald silk. You looked like a queen who didn't know she had a kingdom. That night, I went home and drew the blueprints for this house. Every room was designed with your height, your reach, your favorite colors in mind." Claire felt a wave of dizziness. It was the ultimate romantic gesture, a house built as a love letter, but the letter was written in a language of obsession. "What happens now, Julian?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Now that I've seen it." He smiled, a beautiful, devastating expression that reached his eyes. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers, and led her toward a small, hidden velvet sofa in the corner of the gallery. "Now," he breathed, pulling her into his lap, his heated, muscular chest a solid wall against her back. "Now we stop pretending. You don't have to wonder if I'm thinking of you, Claire. You know I'm thinking of nothing else." He kissed the nape of her neck, his hands possessively mapping her waist. The tension in the room was electric, a mix of fear and a strange, intoxicating surrender. But as Claire's hand brushed the side of the sofa, she felt something cold and metallic tucked into the cushions. She glanced down. It was a second set of keys. But these weren't for the house. They were labeled, "The West Wing Vault, Do Not Enter." Julian's grip tightened slightly, his lips hovering just above hers. "Don't look away, Claire. Look at me. I'm the only world you'll ever need." The air in the shrine felt unnaturally still. Julian's kiss was a fever, desperate, heavy, and possessive, but Claire's mind was anchored to the cold metal of the keys hidden in the velvet cushions. Every time his rough, architect's hand traced her waist, she felt the weight of his obsession. He didn't just love her, he had constructed her. "You're trembling, my love," Julian murmured against her lips, his dark eyes searching hers with a terrifyingly soft concern. "The secrets of this room, they were always meant for you. There is no more distance between us." He pulled her closer, his muscular chest a wall of heat that demanded her complete surrender. For a moment, wrapped in the expensive scent of his cologne and the amber glow of the gallery, Claire wanted to believe the lie. She wanted to believe this was the ultimate romance. But as Julian led her back toward the spiral staircase, his hand never leaving the small of her back, she managed to slip the West Wing Vault keys into the silk pocket of her robe. That night, Julian slept with the peacefulness of a man who had finally offloaded a heavy burden. Claire lay awake, watching the moonlight cut across his handsome, sleeping face. He looked perfect. He looked like the man of her dreams. She crept out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floors. The West Wing was Julian's private professional domain, a place of drafting tables, blueprints, and high-tech security. She found the vault door behind a mahogany bookshelf. It wasn't steel like the shrine, it was heavy, reinforced oak with a digital keypad and a manual override. She inserted the key. Click. The vault didn't hold drawings. It held a high-definition monitoring station. A dozen screens flickered to life, showing every corner of the estate in night vision green. But it wasn't just the hallways. There were cameras inside the mirrors, behind the vents, and, Claire's breath hitched, even inside the headboard of their bed. In the center of the desk sat a leather-bound ledger. She opened it. It wasn't an architectural log. It was a compatibility journal. March 12th, Claire prefers lilies over roses. Noted for the conservatory. April 19th, she mentioned a fear of heights. I will adjust the balcony railings to be 2 inches higher to ensure she feels safe enough to never leave. June 2nd, the marriage proposal must happen in Amalfi. The acoustics of the cliffside will amplify her emotional response by 40%. Julian hadn't fallen in love with her. He had engineered a scenario where she had no choice but to fall in love with him. Every coincidence, every shared interest, every romantic spark had been a calculated move in a 3-year architectural project. The data doesn't lie, Claire. She spun around. Julian was leaning against the doorframe, wrapped in a dark silk robe, his silhouette casting a long, predatory shadow across the monitors. He wasn't smiling anymore. His expression was one of clinical, heartbreaking disappointment. "I spent millions to ensure our souls were a perfect match," he said, walking toward her, the glow of the surveillance screens reflecting in his dark eyes. "I removed every obstacle, every rival, every doubt. I gave you the perfect life. Why wasn't that enough?" He backed her against the desk, his hands slamming down on either side of her, caging her in. The romance was gone, replaced by the cold, hard steel of a man who viewed his wife as his greatest achievement. "You're not a husband," Claire choked out, tears blurring her vision. "You're a jailer." Julian leaned in, his face inches from hers, his voice a low, terrifying caress. "I am the man who built the world you breathe in, Claire. And in this world, there is no exit." The hum of the surveillance monitors was the only sound in the suffocating stillness of the vault. Julian's face, illuminated by the ghostly green glow of the screens, looked like a statue, cold, perfect, and unyielding. His hands remained braced on the desk, trapping Claire against the very evidence of his obsession. "Removing every rival." Claire's voice was a ragged whisper. She thought of her ex-fiancé who had vanished after a mysterious accident, and the job offer in London that had been rescinded without explanation. "What did you do, Julian?" Julian didn't flinch. He leaned in closer, the scent of expensive sandalwood and something sharp, like ozone, filling her senses. "I cleared the path, Claire. I removed the noise so you could finally hear the music of us. I didn't destroy them, I simply redirected their trajectories. They weren't worthy of being part of your masterpiece." The possessive heat in his eyes was terrifying. He reached out, his fingers tracing the trembling line of her jaw. Despite the horror, his touch still carried that practiced, magnetic tenderness that had won her heart. It was a romantic poison, expertly administered. "You're insane," she breathed, her hand reaching behind her, fumbling blindly across the desk for anything, a letter opener, a heavy paperweight. "I am a man who achieves his goals," Julian corrected, his voice dropping to a low, rhythmic velvet. He stepped into her space, his chest pressing against her, forcing her to look up at him. "I built this world for you. Every stone, every camera, every coincidence was a brick in the temple of our love. You say I'm a jailer, but look around, is this not the most beautiful prison ever conceived?" He captured her lips in a kiss that was no longer an invitation, it was a reclamation. It was a searing, desperate attempt to override her fear with the passion he had spent years engineering. For a heartbeat, the old Claire, the one who worshipped him, wanted to melt into his heat. But then she saw her own sleeping face on the monitor behind him, a private moment stolen and filed away as data. With a surge of adrenaline, Claire's fingers closed around a heavy, silver drafting compass. She didn't strike him. Instead, she slammed the sharp point into the main control console of the monitoring station. Sparks showered the room, the screens flickering and dying one by one. The electronic lock on the vault door let out a long, mechanical groan as the system short-circuited. Julian roared, not in pain, but in the agony of a creator watching his work crumble. He lunged for her, but Claire was faster. She shoved past him, the silk of her robe fluttering as she sprinted toward the darkened library. "Claire," his voice echoed through the sprawling estate, no longer a baritone velvet but a jagged, desperate command. "You can't leave. The perimeter is keyed to my heartbeat. You'll never get past the gates." She didn't stop. She ran toward the grand entrance, the moonlight through the glass walls casting long, skeletal shadows across the marble. She reached the heavy oak door, the one he had carried her over just months ago. She grabbed the handle, but it didn't budge. She looked at the keypad. It was dead. The short circuit had locked the entire house down. She was trapped in the masterpiece, and the architect was coming for her, his footsteps echoing rhythmically on the stairs behind her. "There is no exit, Claire," Julian's voice drifted down the hall, calm and terrifyingly loving once again. "I designed it that way. We stay here, together, until the end of the story." The emergency lights bathed the grand foyer in a rhythmic, pulsing crimson. Each flash of red revealed Julian at the top of the marble staircase, his silhouette tall and imposing, his shadow stretching down toward Claire like reaching fingers. The house, his masterpiece, had become a tomb of silence, the electronic hum of his surveillance replaced by the heavy thud of his deliberate footsteps. "Every lock, Claire. Every window. Every exit," Julian said, his voice calm, almost instructional. He began to descend, his hand sliding smoothly down the mahogany railing. "I accounted for every variable. I even accounted for your rebellion. It's what makes you so captivating, the fire in the sculpture." Claire backed away from the dead keypad, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. She looked at the glass walls of the conservatory. They were reinforced, triple-paned, designed to withstand a hurricane. She looked at the heavy oak door. It was a fortress. Julian was right, he had built a world with no back door. But as she backed into the center of the great hall, her heel caught on the edge of the bronze inlay in the floor, the compass rose Julian had designed to mark the center of their home. "The heart of the house," Julian whispered, now only a few feet away. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, his eyes filled with a terrifying, mournful adoration. "Stay with me, Claire. In the dark, we don't need cameras. We only need each other." Claire looked down at the compass rose. She remembered the blueprints she'd glimpsed in the vault, the mechanical core of the house. Julian was an architect of aesthetics, but he was also a slave to symmetry. For every high-tech lock, there had to be a manual release for the fire marshals. And Julian, in his arrogance, had hidden the master lever right under their feet, at the heart. "I loved the man I thought you were," Claire said, her voice steadying as she looked him in the eye. She saw the flicker of genuine pain in his expression, the only thing he hadn't engineered. As Julian leaned in for a final, desperate kiss, Claire didn't flinch. She grabbed the heavy bronze centerpiece of the compass rose and twisted it with every ounce of her strength. Clack whoosh. The floor vibrated. Deep in the bowels of the estate, the emergency manual override engaged. The heavy oak doors didn't just unlock, they swung wide under hydraulic pressure. The high-pitched alarm of the security perimeter began to wail, a mechanical scream that shattered the silence. Julian froze, his hand inches from her skin. For the first time, the architect looked small. The world he had built was literally opening up, letting the cold, honest night air rush in. "You're part of the design, Claire," he shouted over the alarm, his voice cracking. "You can't exist outside of it." "Watch me," she replied. Claire didn't look back. She sprinted through the open doors, her silk robe catching the wind like a sail. She ran past the manicured gardens, past the stone statues that looked like silent witnesses, and out through the iron gates that had finally lost their bite. She reached the main road just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon. Behind her, the glass and steel fortress sat on the hill, beautiful and hollow. Julian stood on the balcony, a lonely figure in a perfect frame, watching his masterpiece walk away into a world he couldn't control. Claire was free. But as she touched her neck, she realized she was still wearing the diamond pendant he'd given her on their wedding day. Inside was a microscopic GPS tracker, still pulsing with a faint, steady light. The architect never truly stops building. She broke the house, but did she break the bond? Julian is still out there, and he has the blueprints to her soul. Is this the end, or just the beginning of a much larger game? Thank you for riding this wave of obsession and romance. This story may be over, but the thrill is just beginning. Fire if you want a brand new series starting tomorrow, smash that like button. Bell subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss a secret. Speech balloon comment, freedom, if you think Claire made it, or trapped, if you think Julian is already 10 steps ahead.